Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight on this sunny evening? Good? Good. I keep on seeing news from the United States about the blowups and the cases there, and I feel lucky we're in Canada, I'll tell you that. Um, but one thing I'm curious about is the death rate. I see the cases, but I don't see the number of deaths as much reported. So that's one thing I'd like to see more clearly reported on. Anyway, so we've got an interesting topic to cover tonight. And first, why do you think I chose this topic? Ethics and sustainable development. A certain charity scandal. Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't want to point any fingers at people, I don't do that. Yeah, it's relevant today. I mean, these are the things that people jump on all over, and it's not just the obvious one is the We charity that's in the news with Justin and his gang and folks, and how that's unfolded. That's an obvious one, but also, I mean, we're being confronted with a lot of ethical issues right now along different domains, social, environmental, and so forth. And all, I mean, they're all linked to ethics, right? Sports teams as well, right? With the renaming of sports teams and so forth. And these are all things that we have to think about and make some decisions as to what we think, which direction things should go in. And for everybody that is on this call live, whether you're in an undergrad program or a graduate program, you're all in some way, shape, or form um, going to be pursuing careers or are in careers that are related to the environment and sustainable development. And with that, you're going to be confronted, and I'm sure many of you have been faced with professional circumstances where you need to make ethical decisions, and they're tricky. It's a difficult thing to do unless you have a process. So there seems to be a whole lot of questionable things happening in Alberta these days. And yeah, we can talk about that. I'm not up to speed with what's going on in Alberta, but yeah, there's a lot of things going down. But what I want to go through tonight and what I want to share with you is something that I learned from one of my profs at yes, every career choice will face ethical dilemmas. We all face personal ethical dilemmas on a day-to-day basis, right? So, but I learned a system that has been tremendously helpful for me um, over the last 20 years, and I learned it from Royal Roads University and from one of my professors, Jim McTaggart Cowan, when I was an undergrad there a long time ago, and in a course called Pollution Prevention and Ethics. And he kind of taught us or walked us through a system that comes from a book, but it's also very practical. And what I want to do tonight is just go through that and then kind of not workshop it, that sounds funny, but um, demonstrate how you can use it, and then actually get some cases from you guys to make this interactive. Uh, so why do you think I chose this backdrop for the theme of this talk? What does this say to you? Yep, it's messy. It's multidimensional. There's many colors. There's many textures. Um, there's diversity there. There's a lack of order in some ways. You can see that. It's a mix, and the issue with ethical decision making is that's what it's like. It's like an open field. You have to come to some sort of solution, right? You have to make a decision, and a decision is definitive. Often in a professional circumstance, you need definitive decisions. And when you're confronted with disorder and chaos and complexity, it's difficult to do that, right? And so what I'm going to try and attempt to do in this session is give you a system. And it's not the only one. There's other ways to do it, but this is one that I've used and learned to help take that kind of these situations, which are often messy, and give it some order so you can walk through it and then help you make your decisions with that kind of, assurance that you've had some sort of filter to go through, okay? So that's the mission for tonight. And I'm just going to get going. And I'm just going to go through the system and then give you an example, and then we'll kind of have a little more interactivity, and I want to get an example from you guys, or multiple. So we hear this word a lot. We hear you're unethical, right? In the news, in our personal lives, or what have you. We hear it a lot, and we hear it from all points of society. And in fact, I would say that today, in the world that we live in, it seems a heck of a lot easier to criticize situations or people than before. I don't know whether it's a greater degree of social acceptance for doing so, which is not necessarily a bad thing, or the ease of doing it with things such as social media and so forth at scale, right? We can criticize something at scale. So what's a really good example of something that, I think we can all agree is a pretty significant ethical breach that has been criticized at scale hugely over the past month and a half. One incident that has then kind of had far-reaching effects that probably wouldn't have happened were it not for social media. What is the event I'm referring to? There we go. Yeah, that's the one, and there's others as well, but that's probably the one that's at the top of mind. And it was caught on social media or by someone's cell phone and then widely shared. And as a result, I mean, it's really spurned on a lot of, at least the start of a lot of social change. And that is based on commonly understood or agreed upon ethical principles, I would say, right? I don't know many people that would say that that was a good scene or acceptable. I don't personally, and maybe there's some people out there, but even the most harsh people I know, on the scale of Me Too, but more, I mean, it's really, that has gone, orders of magnitude, I think, greater actually. So it's happening, and these are things that are happening. So I mean, but what do we base that on? Like, what do we base that judgment on, if something is ethical or not? And this is the question that I'm posing to you. Well, how do you say something is or is not ethical? And the challenge with this question is that ethics and ethical decisions are value laden. They are, culturally differentiated, value laden decisions. And they're dependent on what you think of various values, like what values you carry. So in order to make these decisions, particularly in a professional environment where you have a little more constraints on you, it's useful to have some sort of a system to guide you through a process for screening these decisions and then determining whether or not something you feel is ethical or not. And that doesn't say that there's an absolute here, because there isn't. It will be relative, but the system is absolute. The system is the system, okay, the one that I'm going to show you. All right? So the model that I'm going to show you and that I've used is from this book here. And again, all of the information that I will share with you is in the notes that can be downloaded from the description in the YouTube video when it's posted. But this is the book, Ethical Decision Making in Everyday Work Situations. So now this system of ethics, as I've said, is based on everyday work situations. That's how it's contextualized. Therefore, it's a little different than saying studying ethics, philosophical ethics, or that type of examination of ethical principles, and evaluating in that way. So, like for instance, if you look at, say, I don't know, the ethics between human rights in the Middle East, right? There's a lot to that question as to historical development, cultural issues, and so forth, which you require a very deep level of analysis and understanding of history and so forth in order to really, do that properly. This is different. I mean, this is looking at operational ethics in professional decision-making context. That's the type of ethics that I'm going to try and communicate to you, which it doesn't differentiate itself from your personal life, like making personal ethical decisions, but this is not like a deep critical analysis of culture, for instance. It could be, but this is more operational. So the model that I'm going to walk through with you right now is referred to as the Chapel-Furts model. Okay? So what do you think that word stands for? Have you ever heard of that before? Anybody ever heard of that before? Which language do you think it comes from? Which culture? No. Anybody else with guesses? Austrian? No. The right answer is it doesn't come from a culture. It's an acronym. It's funny because I say Chapel-Furts. I've used this before. And people are like, is that German or Austrian, or I get Hebrew as well? No, it's an acronym. It's not a word. It's not culturally derived. It's an acronym. Each one of those letters stands for one of the values that we're going to talk about. Okay. So the values are, what do you think C stands for? What value or what principle? Good. Caring. H. No. No. So caring is the first one, which is like compassion. I would say those could be interchangeable. Being compassionate or being caring are very similar. H. Anybody? Honesty. Yes. Nope. Honesty. So we've got caring, we've got honesty. A. What do you think A is? Accountability. Very good. Yes. Caring, honesty, accountability. Um, P. I don't think you'll get this one, so I'll say it. P is for promises, promise keeping. You won't get the next one, E. E is pursuit of excellence. L, what do you think L is? Loyalty, yes. F, what is F? Fairness, exactly. Very good. I, what do you think I is? This one should be easy. Integrity, exactly. Very good. Yeah, integrity is one that I think we should know. R, responsibility is close. It's respect. It's respect for others. And Z, I don't think you'll get Z because it's a tricky one. Z is from the middle of the word. It's responsible citizenship, being a responsible citizen. Okay. So this is the basis This is the framework. Being caring, being honesty, or possessing honesty, accountability, promise keeping, pursuit of excellence, loyalty, fairness, integrity, respect for others, and responsible citizenship. Those are the key tenets or principles behind Mary Guy's framework for ethical decision making in the work situations. Okay, so we're just going to run through each one of those, and then I'm going to test them out. I'm going to walk you through, and we'll look at different examples. So caring, like how would that play out? Like, why do you think caring is an important principle, like that important to include as one of the principles to filter decisions through? Yeah, things are not black and white. I think empathetic to other situations is an important thing that embodies being caring. Whether something deserves attention, that's a good way to look at it as well. You should care about certain things. I tend to look at it from an empathetic standpoint, whether or not you're being caring with the individuals. We make decisions based on emotions. I think caring comes into that. Yes, absolutely. So being caring and being attentive and being compassionate and empathetic with the decisions that we make is often something that, especially in the professional context, seems to be discouraged a lot of the time. I don't know if it's been discouraged, but it's it's certainly not been, I don't know, encouraged in my experience. So being caring is important, and it's something to, that's part of the reason why I think it's up at the front. Honesty. What about honesty? Why is it important? Builds trust. It's a foundation to good relationships for sure. Um, you got to walk the talk. That's one thing, and this is another thing we'll talk about when we get to the example. Is especially if you're in a given kind of situation or profession, even you gotta live by what you say. Um, and then just honesty is the tricky one because sometimes it's hard to be honest, but sometimes you have to be honest, right? And we'll get into trade-offs. Sometimes you don't want to be honest, and sometimes it may be not the right thing. Being transparent, that's another thing. Accountability. So what is accountability? What does that mean to be accountable, or what does accountability mean? Does it mean you do your accounting? You accept responsibility for your actions. Correct. That's a big part of being accountable. It's being responsible, recognizing your responsibilities, taking ownership. Yes, absolutely. Taking ownership for the things that you do. So to give Justin Trudeau quite a bit of credit, um, he has done a good job of responding to this. In fact, I think it was today or last night or yesterday, by owning the situation. With the We Charity. I can't say that's enough for a lot of people. I don't think it will be, to be honest with you, just because there's been several things. But I mean, I would have thought there has been. I hope that he has gotten some good advisors now. I think it would be in his best interest to do that. And what they would have advised him, if they were worth any, worth their own salt, is to be accountable and come out as being accountable right away, immediately. You want to, when you're faced with these situations, the faster you take ownership and the faster you take accountability for it, the better. Because what happens when you don't? Like, what happens when you delay? What do you think the perception is? Yeah, deceit, trust is lost, lost of credibility. People think you're trying to hide something. You're trying to kind of, and it's almost worse sometimes to like delay and make it and then come out later. because then it almost is a worse case scenario, because then in fact you do come across as being deceitful. Like, why didn't you come clean right away? So being accountable is a really important part of that. Promise keeping. What about that one? Why is that important? Again, deeply related to trust. So you see a lot of these issues are related to trust. If you made a promise, then you should be accountable for that. You should back that up. The next one's interesting, and this one is follow through. Good. Um, Politicians don't tend to be the best at that one. That's probably one I would think that's kind of the big one for those in political positions. Because to give them some credit, sometimes they're faced with difficulties. It's hard to the context changes, therefore it's difficult for them to keep the promises they make at certain times, right? And that they're all talking heads. Yeah, well, there's that too. Pursuit of excellence. What about this? What do you think about this one as an ethical value? Pursuit of excellence. It's the E for the chapel. Why do you think that's important? It's yeah, you want to be better, self-improvement. Yeah, exactly. If you're a doctor, I think perhaps pursuit of excellence would be something you did seek from him. I've been in that situation myself. I had a bad surfing accident a few years ago and broke my neck. And like fortunately, my doctor pursued excellence and was able to fix my neck. And you know, it's important, especially in these situations where this is professional. Like these again, remember the context of what we're talking about. In a professional context, we want to pursue excellence. I mean, this is a good value. You want to you want to embody that. You want to encourage that. You want to set the standards. You want to set an example. And I really migrated to this when I was at Royal Roads, um, because it differentiated the institution and continues to differentiate the institution from others. And universities in general, you could say the same for, other places I've studied at or other universities. The idea of these institutions and a lot of organizations is to pursue excellence. I mean, in a good performing organization, it should be. And if it's not, then I think, that's not a group that I want to be part of personally. Like I would like to see. Now, how you define excellence, I mean, that's a different story. But the pursuit of that, the pursuit as an individual, then as an organization, I think is a really interesting one to include, because you can use that as a guide. Like, are these decisions that I'm making right now allowing us to pursue excellence, right? So that's an important one in my opinion, as are the other ones, but it's a little different than, say, being honest. Loyalty. What does this mean? And why do you think it's important? Builds community. I mean, it touches on something else that we talked about before that's come up a lot is trust, right? Loyalty is like intrinsically connected to the idea of trust. But then, but in terms of loyalty, how might that how might that manifest itself? It helps collaboration, exactly. Who wants to work with other people who don't share loyalty to either your team or your organization or whatever culture you're in? Um, there's a certain kind of we recognize that, like if we look at situations like we all do as human beings, and then, we can actually pass off a lot of things based on loyalty, right? Have you ever looked at situations where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that person did that. Can you believe it? But then you learn that they did it because of, their loyalty to something or someone, right? Have you ever seen that circumstance before where someone's done something, you're like, oh my God, they did that? Either incredulously or something that's highly admirable or something they're like questionable. But then you find out they did it based on loyalty. How does that change things in your perception, or how has that? In my experience, I can justify certain things. Sometimes I look and I go, what are they doing? And like, oh, it's because they're loyal to this, like either a person or whomever. So loyalty is an important one. Um, it's not always clear, and I'm not saying that loyalty should be in front of a lot of the other ones, but it's certainly something that can motivate us as individuals and motivate groups for better or for worse, right? You could say, well, there's a lot of people that were loyal to, a dictator, and they did terrible things, and they followed because of loyalty. Loyalty can be blinding, absolutely, absolutely. Loyalty can be good and it can be bad. And this is why I'm saying that, like North Korea, exactly. There are situations where loyalty may be something that is not necessarily a good thing. And this is why it's not the only value in place, but it's one of them for sure. It's one thing we need to think about when we are going through a situation. Okay? Fairness. What about fairness? Why is this important? Equality, respecting diversity for sure. Um, and you know what? Like, it's interesting. I think we have this, and I don't know the literature behind this, but I think we have a desire to see fairness. Like when we see something that's not fair, um, like if you're watching a competition and it's not judged properly, right, or something like that, and it just doesn't seem fair. It seems wrong, right? So fairness is one of those ones that I think it's a collective value that we like to see. It's fair, fair competition. Kids are literally born with a sense of fairness. Is that true? We'll support the underdog um, when there is no fairness in films. That is true. People will trust your judgment. That's another thing too. When you are, and this is, if you're in a management position and people are going to judge your decisions, um, you want to make decisions that are fair because that is you want to cultivate that in an organization so that people there is no um, favoritism or nepotism and so forth. So another issue with this recent charity thing is it appears that it's not fair. And why is it not fair? Like the idea, yeah, the idea itself, I don't think many people disagree with the idea of having that amount of taxpayer money put into a program to get youth employed or remunerated for doing good things in society, like for doing volunteer work. I don't know. I don't think that's the big issue. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I certainly don't have a problem with it. I think it's great. In fact, I think it's a fantastic idea. The problem is, though, it doesn't seem like it was a fair process, right? And there was conflict of interest. So there's a couple of issues there. So fairness, important. Uh, Integrity. What does integrity mean? We use it a lot. We use that word integrity. That person has no integrity, or that is a person of integrity. It's one. What's the definition of integrity? Values. Sure. But this is a tricky one though, because probably a safe definition of integrity would mean that a person is operating based on a solid set of values. They make their decisions based on values that they hold that we agree with, right? But that's tricky though, because what if those are values, there's some values that we don't agree with, right? I think integrity perhaps um, could mean that there's a core set of values like being honest, being compassionate, being accountable, um, keeping your promises. I think being loyal, and those ones are kind of embodied in the idea of integrity. However, there's other things like someone can have a lot of integrity, but then make, you know, be really disrespectful perhaps to some people, right? So integrity is, it's funny. It's an integral. I guess that's probably the root of integrity. It's integral. There's integrating different values together. Okay. And respect for others. Respect. What does that mean to you? Incorruptibility, integrity, incorruptibility. That's important too. Important part of it. Respect for others. Caring about other people's opinions and values, correct. Right. Respecting other people's space, respecting other cultures for what they are, um, just generally respecting history, respecting where it's deserved, like respecting tradition. So, like I work in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia, and it's interesting because often I will get kind of questioned by colleagues or friends about how I feel about working with a culture like that, which is obviously different than Western society. And I will say, well, it's tricky because there's certain things that they're values that I don't share, but at the same time, I do understand where they're coming from, and I respect that there's a different history, there's a different culture, and a different base, and we find, I find common ground, and I also am able to say there's certain things that I can accept, and there's certain things that I can't accept, and then I have to make decisions about that, and it's part of that though is ensuring that I feel comfortable with myself for maintaining a respect for where they're coming from, how they were raised, their culture, their history, their norms, etc., etc. And often this is a tricky thing to do, and these days it's very easy to be critical without taking a step back and understanding where groups are coming from, right? Before jumping to making kind of value judgments on them. And that's not to say I'm, justifying a lot of things that go down there, or in other cultures for that matter. It's not just Saudi Arabia, but there's been other places I've worked where it's like it's a lot different, right? And so you have to kind of respect the place, especially if you're working internationally. It's the one thing that I hit a lot. And the last one is responsible citizenship. So why is this an important thing that's included in this framework? This is particularly important for what we're doing. Why is responsible citizenship in this mix? Good intention isn't always enough. There should be research and knowledge to back up involvement for sure. And I think um, authentic, you have to carry the values of work over your personal life, that too. Um, also, like, I think this one's important for our chosen line of work or China chosen line of study. Uh, and it could be less so in other programs, even at Royal Roads. This may not be as feature as prominently. But what are we concerned with? Like, what is a big thing that, I think we can all agree upon, that's something that we study and work on? A shared value that presumably we all have, based on the fact that you have enrolled in these programs. The health of the environment, exactly. This is it's a tacit understanding I have anyway, after having, done this job for over 10 years of teaching various people at universities. I have an understanding or an assumption that people who are in these courses care about the environment. And usually that's the truth. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a student who didn't, although I've had, various, extents of that. But this value here, responsible citizenship, is important because it speaks to the commons, right? And a big part of what we do in our work is valuing the commons, right? What we are doing is hopefully making the commons a better place, meaning the environment, society, and the economy, if we're looking at it broadly. Okay, so responsible citizenship is an important one to include because it kind of takes us out of our own organization and spreads out that kind of sense of civic duty, or in our case, a duty to nature to some degree, and then embodies that, or operationalize that belief in the system of ethics. Okay, so those are a bunch of principles, again, right there, that you can use, or I use anyway, to screen certain situations. Okay, so that's all fine and dandy, but how often do you think that some of those conflict? Are you, like, if you were to rank on a scale to 1 to 5 whether or not you were, fulfilling that value on any given situation, each one of those, how often would you get a 5 for all of those, do you think? Think it's easy? Not possible, exactly. I don't know, I won't say not possible, but close to impossible. I think you're right. Yeah, we can try our best, but this is why it's useful to have a system, because the truth is, and the reality is, in any given situation, um, you'll have to often make trade-offs between those values, correct? And you say, okay, well, even if I look at, um, just two of these, right? If we're in a professional context and we're forced to make a decision that is in the best interest of the company, but may have detrimental effects on society to some degree, um, then we may not be as responsible of a citizen as we hope we could be, right? It just, that's just might be the situation that you're put in. So there's no situation where it's perfect. You can make this perfect decision where you can walk away and say, ah. However, with something like this, at least you can try. That's the thing with Linda's point. Trying your best is important. Um, and this allows you to do that, okay? And or may not, it just depends. So let's try this out, okay? So I'm going to give you a situation, and then we're going to walk through this by value, and I want to get from you how you think we should respond to this. Does that sound good? This is like the real stuff. This is not a real situation. Actually, I'll give you a real one after this one. Okay. Okay. This is the example is public consultation. Okay. For example, I'm going to give you two examples, and then I want to hear an example from you. First one, you're working for a company as an environmental consultant doing public consultation. Okay, that's your job. Like you're doing environmental impact assessment, you're hired as a contractor or you're an employee and you're running a public consultation based on an EIA. You're preparing for meetings with the local community. So this would be a community that is somehow linked to the project. Either there's perceived impacts, it's in the geographic area. This is one of the things you do when you do an EIA. But then in your preparation for this meeting, you discover that the studies that have been published, so the ones that have been issued in advance of the public consultation, did not disclose all the information on the potential impacts in the area of that community. Specifically, one of the impacts, the CEO indicated that some of the results that showed abnormal growths in some of the benthic species, so there's a river around that area, and particularly snails, not indicative of anything significant because there were no direct measurements of excessive pollutants. However, there were some abnormalities in those snails. But the CEO said, well, you know, we don't have direct measurements of anything it could be anything that's causing that. No, so we're not include that in the report. Then you are to go in front of a public consultation and present those results. What do you do? That's the situation. Okay? So, first, I'm going to walk through each one of our values. I'm going to ask you what you think, how that would kind of represent itself in this given situation. If you were in the situation, if it was you who was faced with this. Number one, caring. What would it mean to be caring in this situation? What would you have to think about? What would it mean to be caring in this situation? Okay. You could think about caring about the values of the company versus the environmental effects, which one you're empathetic to, for sure. So, I mean, you have to think about, your company. I mean, that's one thing. But what else? In terms of values to people. I think one of the things that the stakeholders, there we go. Exactly. So Linda, honest for sure, but the key thing, caring about giving people all the info so they make it better. Exact. Well, the real caring there, I would think, and this is how I would interpret it, and I saw this, I'd be like, well, I'm going to go into a public consultation. Say this is in northern British Columbia or wherever, and there is a result as an environmental professional or environmental scientist that I'm a little uneasy about because there potentially could be something that could be detrimental to this community, right? That would be my judgment right away. I'd look at that and go, there could be something that could impact this community that we are not disclosing. So I would care about the health of the people. I'd also obviously care about my company and so forth, but I'd really have to identify that, and that might be one of the things that would cause me to make to push back on that one. So caring about the people to disclose that. Honesty. I think this one is fairly clear. How would honesty play a role here? Yeah, full disclosure. If you found that out as an individual before you to do this and you did not disclose that, one could argue that you're being dishonest, right? I think another way to look at it as well would be honesty to your organization. So if you have concerns about that issue, voicing those concerns to your CEO would be the honest thing to do, right? Because perhaps they wouldn't have the full background. I mean, I know a lot of people wouldn't. They'd say, "Oh, well, that just doesn't seem relevant." Whereas, if you know a lot about endocrine disruptors, that's how endocrine disruptors work. You see them. We first really start to see them because there was deformities in snails and different species that were uptaking these endocrine disruptors. And usually, those are chemicals that were side products from birth control and various kind of medicines and so forth. And it was a bioindicator for that. So maybe they didn't know, like maybe the CEO doesn't know about that. So being honest would be, so look, in my professional estimation, I think if we don't pay attention to this, we could be exposing ourselves to liability. We could be exposing the community to harm. But that's being honest about that situation. I feel uneasy about this. It might be an idea to sit down with the CEO and your team and say, look, I don't feel great about this because I know that this, which seems innocuous, might be something that we need to worry about, right? Accountability. This is a tricky one, right? How does accountability play a role here? Because you're running a public consultation for your company. You have to ask yourself, who are you accountable to? You could lose professional credibility, right? The public, the community, yeah, that's another group you're accountable to. So you as an individual, professionally, are accountable to your company, but you're also accountable to your profession, right? Um, so professional ethics. So you have a body of ethics, and this is even more clearly articulated in medicine, and there's certain professions that have professional codes of ethics, right? Um, but again, also another way to look at accountability here, though, is organizationally, right? So you could look at this and say, look, as a company, and again, this might be something you'd want to raise and say, look, um, as a company, we are accountable to the societies in which, or the communities in which we are working, we potentially may impact, right? And if you hide these things, if you don't disclose things, how exactly? So what happens if something like that happens? What will you lose as an organization if something goes south? So what has happened to the Liberal Party as a result of what has happened with this one particular incident with the charity? You lose trust. You lose trust, and you lose something. Two words. They start with S, and the L is the second word. It's the phrase we use with organizations. If you really lose it as an organization, like if you really drop the ball, you will lose this. Blank, blank to operate. Social license, exactly. And this is important for those that are taking environmental accounting, environmental management for sure. That's a big part of what you're doing. Might lead to the people. It could have a whistleblower, right? That's possible. Um, so a loss of accountability as an organization can result in the loss of social license, right? So what are we seeing then in with the sports teams, right? Like the Redskins in Washington Redskins. That's an interesting one. So they're going to change their name. Why do you think they're changing their name? If you've been watching the news, you know why. It's not necessarily the right reason, but yeah. So they are changing their name because of pressure from sponsors. So in that case, they see their accountability to sponsors, because I don't know if they would have done it otherwise. In fact, they have like dug in their feet and did these changes for a while. Now, I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I'm talking about the principle of accountability. Now, if they had a different view of accountability, like for instance, if they felt that they were accountable to the community in which they operated and saw that these norms were changing, yes, the CEO was dead set against it and has stated that publicly before. But it's FedEx, and FedEx has the name on the building, I believe. They will revoke their sponsorship unless they change that name, and then that has seemingly resulted in that. But the issue of it, the ethical decision here, it's a lot of things, but one of it is accountability, right? So being accountable to a community. You could say if that were your main priority, you wanted to be accountable to the community, you might have just voluntarily changed the name, got ahead of it, said, look, we think that society has changed since we first started our team, whatever it was, however many years ago, and we feel that the time is right to adapt, and therefore we're going to do that. In this case, the response seems to be as a result of being accountable, financially accountable, or not accountable to FedEx. And one other way of looking at this is accountability to the organization. So one argument could be, and an ethical argument could say, well, we respect our tradition and our history. And we've had this name for a long time, and we want to maintain tradition. So respect to history, I mean, could be an argument for keeping that name, as it could be for keeping certain statues and so forth. These aren't clear issues, but accountability certainly is something that we need to think about. Okay, back to our example. Promise keeping. So we're going in. One of the things is, in our professional circumstance, giving this community consultation, I think an element of promise keeping would be that we have signed a contract to fulfill our duties as a professional, right? That's a you promise to do your job, right? So therefore that's what you're going to do, right? That's a value. Now, how you go ahead and do it, that's a different story, but that's one of the promises you made in this stance was you signed up. You sign up to work for that company. You are not signing up to work for Greenpeace, and you are not signing up to work for the community organization. That is your job. You made a promise. So that's part of your deal right there as your code of ethics. Loyalty. This is a big one. How would loyalty play a role here? Who are you loyal to? Exactly. This is the question. Are you loyal to the CEO? To the public? Are you loyal to your professional organization? Maybe it could be another organization. Maybe it's loyalty. Like I remember when I said loyalty is a tricky one because, it really depends. People will do things out of loyalty that otherwise we might consider to be wrong. So what if you were in a situation where, I don't know, your significant other was dying of cancer and you needed that job to pay for the additional treatments. And when this came up, you looked at the situation and said, look, I can be the whistleblower or I can just go through with this because I need to support my significant other right now. Like my loyalty right now is to my family, right? We may look at that and go, well, hey, I see where they're coming from. So loyalty, but it is an issue here. You have to look at and ask yourself in those situations, am I being loyal? Now here I would say loyalty, the feature that I would think that would be most prominent in this circumstance would be, are you loyal to the company, the CEO individually, or to the stakeholders that you have engaged with, right? But I think the big issue there probably I would think would be the CEO. and the company? How loyal are you? So you have to look at the dynamics. Fairness. Paycheck, that's another. Loyal to the paycheck, that's another. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you could be under circumstances where, getting paid that's the thing you need to do, right? And that, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that is an element of loyalty, might be influencing that for you individually. Fairness. How would you look at fairness in this situation? What's fair? Yeah. I would think here in this situation, the fair thing to do, would be to disclose, to talk to. I think it'd be fair to voice your concerns to your company, your CEO and or your direct superiors, or your management team, whatever, and say, look, this is the fair thing to do, is to disclose this information because people should know if this potentially could be something that could harm them. We can be honest about it. We don't know. We have found this. We're not sure. But to be fair, I think would be, the right thing to do would probably be to disclose that information with the caveat that, you don't we don't fully know, what the potential risks are, but we would like to further study these in order to determine whether or not there's risk to you, the community. Right? That's kind of a fair approach, I would say. And doing that in full communication with the CEO, with your company, I think is also the fair thing to do. Like coming out and being the whistleblower immediately, I'm not sure that would necessarily be fair if you were in an environment that you felt comfortable voicing those concerns, and did it. Then, whereas if you just went and disclosed and without, raising those flags, I'm not sure that would be necessarily fair to the company either. That's a debatable one, but you have to look at the fairness factor. Integrity. How does integrity play a role here? Where your values lie. Are you true to your values? Right? There's your values, your professional code of ethics as well. That would be something you would consider within your integrity. Are you operating with integrity? You know what the best choice, um, one of the best ways of testing integrity is? What do you think that is? When you make your decision, how do you think you can test whether or not you're operating with integrity? Exactly. How do you feel about it? But one of the easiest things is, can you sleep? I don't know how many of you have been in situations, yeah, guilt, where you've, had to make a decision you don't feel great about, and how easy is it to sleep after doing something that is, questioning your integrity or challenging your own personal integrity? Is it easy? Not usually. Those are the nights where you need to, like, you sit up late at night and think about it, right? It's amazing what that can do. Disclose shows consistency to your moral and ethical principles. Yeah. Respect. What about that? Respect for others. If you can be proud of your actions, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a big one. Integrity is a big one. It just depends on how you want to roll. I mean, there's been times that I've done things that I think, maybe I could have done it differently. Most of the times I want to keep I hold that as me personally, integrity is a big thing. And, so I try and kind of keep that, front and center. Respect for others. How does respect play a role here? Full disclosure, yeah. I mean, not being honest with the community, I think that's not respecting their health, taking their concern into consideration, being critical for sure. That's respecting the community, right? But also, all those another dimension of this, making sure that the concerns of the community are represented for sure. Um, there's another thing here, though, which is, which I think, although we may, some could question is I would say respecting the position that the CEO is in, and he or she has to make a executive decision sometimes. And if I were to approach that, say, look, I respect the fact that you have to make executive decisions. And as a CEO, often they're put in situations where, like, say, for instance, if it's a public company with shareholders or a board or whomever that they're accountable to, that they, even they have to make decisions that they may not make sometimes. So like, I would say, look, I respect the position that you're in because you are running this company and the decisions that you make are directly impact, the well-being of the company and the direction forward. However, you know, out of all fairness and all honesty and being accountable to my profession, and in fact, um, um, even pursuing excellence, I have to say that we might have a problem here, right? And we didn't cover, I'll cover pursuit of excellence last. Responsible citizenship. So respect's a really important one. Responsible citizenship. I think this is an obvious one. If we're going to be a responsible citizen, part of that is um, ensuring that we are taking care of the health and well-being of society, of other people, right? So being, in this case, I think just being a responsible citizen is acknowledging that there could be a problem with this situation, right? And the last one that I skipped over, I did see, is pursuit of excellence. So how would you think that would play a role here? Pursuit of excellence. Continuous improvement, for sure. In this case, what is excellence? Responsible leadership, exactly. In this day and age that we live in, being responsible as a leader, as an organization, is very important, right? In fact, you could argue here that not disclosing this could potentially lead to losses down the road. Doing the job right, working out way better than ignoring the elephant in the room, right? So there could be potential liability as well. So the value of pursuing excellence here, I would say, would motivate you to really try and kind of sort this out and come clean with it. Because you could argue that an organization that is pursuing excellence would want to recognize that there could be a problem here that could potentially come back and be an issue down the road. And that would be something, again, you would have to sit down and say, look, discuss this with your CEO and say, look, I mean, I want to work in an organization that is in the pursuit of excellence. This is what I base my career on and based on my activities on a day-to-day basis. When I look at this situation, I think if we don't disclose this, we are potentially exposing ourselves as an organization to potential liability and lawsuits. We could negatively impact the community in which we are doing some business, and that can come back at us and actually harm our organization. So the pursuit of excellence here, I think, would be would be a motivator for coming clean with the situation. Okay, so we've been through all these values, and you see that even in a simple situation where it's like there may be a minor issue, it may even not be significant, that it's not that straightforward of a decision. there are a lot of factors to balance. However, if you're able to use something like this, I'm not saying this is the only system, but something like this, what it does allow you to do is it allows you to go through and test how you're going to proceed. At least for me anyway, it's allowed me to see, okay, is this, can I feel comfortable with this decision based on these values, right? So this is why I like this model. It's easy to use. I mean, it's clear and you can walk through it. So now, I'm not going to keep you much longer because we're running an hour. So I want to conclude by looking at this we case then. Okay, let's do it ourselves and assess it. So given the position, and it's a fun acronym. Yeah, that too. Chapel Furts. It's cute. Caring. What's the caring thing to do with the we situation? How does that play a role? Let's do this quickly. Caring. What's the role here? Put ourselves in Justin Trudeau's situation. Caring about youth having jobs. Exactly. The objective of charity is essentially a good thing. Squish help us support the youth. This is a big one, and in fact, this is one of the things he's stressing. Now, why? It's that's debatable whether they're using it politically or whether I personally I think it's coming from a good place. I think there is a genuine concern for youth who are in a rough spot right now. So there's that, but there's also caring about the maintaining confidence. That's another part. Caring about your party. Another part of this, your family. Now, in his case, his family is getting dragged into. So if you watched the news last night, I mean, I presume that probably his mother's Twitter and all that other social media stuff are just blowing up with. I can't imagine the pushback that his mother and brother and whomever else are getting as a result of this. So caring's going to be a big issue, right? Honesty. What about that? Honesty plays a role here, big time. He seems to feel bad about the press with his mom, for sure. Like that's an obvious one. He's not a bad. I mean, he was a year behind me in grad school. He's not a bad guy. Just sometimes I think some of the decisions that they make is uh, is a bit questionable. Admitting the involvement right away, that's the honest thing to do. Admitting that probably recusing himself from the decision probably would have been the better thing to do. Um, uh, Making sure that people understand that going forward, um, they can trust their organization, their cabinet, for full disclosure. So being with the public, the voters, I think is an important part of this, and being honest with their intentions with this. I'm not convinced that their intentions were to fleece the public and get kickbacks from we. I don't think that's the case. I think, in all honesty, they probably just wanted an expedient way to get this program out the door, and this is the one that they knew of that was the most efficient, so they didn't think about a lot of these things and just pushed it forward, right? Accountability, though, that's the big one. Accountability, how does that play a role? It's a big one because when you're in a position like that, you are accountable to who? Taking responsibility for the actions. Absolutely. This is why it was a really important thing to do, to come out and say, look, I'm sorry. Although he's very good at apologizing. Gets there's a lot of opportunities to do it. It's responsible to Canadians and accountable to taxpayers. Absolutely. That's a big one. This isn't $100,000. This is close to $1 billion. That to me is one of the biggest ones. I mean, that's a lot of cash, right? And this is what the Conservatives are playing like. That's not a small amount of money. I mean, there's no way that that should be a sole source decision. There should clearly be some way of evaluating that with fair competition, ensuring that taxpayers understand that that money is being fairly. Well, we'll get to fair. Accountability, big one. Keeping promise. I mean, part of that is the promise to your stakeholders, to your party, I guess, would be one of that, in his case. But promise to the public, right? You make a promise to the public to operate under certain ethical standards if you're in that position, right? Conflict of interest is a big deal. There's a promise to help youth too as well. So there's a mandate as part of the COVID response, but also from their platform is heavily youth focused. So there's that. But then there's also the promise, I would say promise to just to assume that position. I think there's a tacit promise there to uphold certain values, and one of those ones is conflict of interest, to avoid conflicts of interest, right? Pursuit of excellence. I would think actually this is a tricky one, pursuit of excellence, because the program itself I think is a great idea. You know, like that's a great idea, and actually from what I don't know we well, but from what I gather from friends and of mine, they do good stuff, and the two brothers that run it are seemingly good guys, and therefore you could say that the decision to push forward with that and fast track it was based on the pursuit of excellence in policy to to help youth, right? But at the same time, you could also say that excellence in that position, part of what we would expect as excellence is predicated based on upholding certain ethical principles, one of which would be accountability and honesty, and upholding values such as avoiding conflicts of interest. Loyalty. How does loyalty play a role here? Loyalty to who? There's some in fact, loyalty to we might is a bit of the problem, right? There's loyalty to his family, yes, and this is obviously, I'm sure he feels terrible about that. It seems as though that's the case. There's that. There's loyalty to we, which we don't know. That's the one thing I think. If there's a further inquiry, they're going to look very close into that. Loyalty to the party, that's the big one, and loyalty to your electorate. Loyalty to youth, I think that's a big one, and what they'll try and do, I would say, and what he's attempted to do is to emphasize that. I was being loyal to our platform and to the youth of Canada to help them out in this time of strife, right? So that's fair. I get that. Fairness. How does fairness play a role here? Do we think it's fair? Yes, that's a big issue. Should have been made public, yes. And although, from what we understand thus far, there was consultation, but they felt that other charities could not do it. I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, that was going to come out. But the fairness issue is the big one, and this is actually one of the big X marks on this test. This is ethical test, is fairness. We do not feel that the process was fair, because typically in these kind of circumstances, you do a request for proposals, you evaluate those proposals based on equal criteria amongst the different groups. I do this all the time, like with things that we bid on. And a fair process is one where everybody gets a fair shot and the winner wins. And there's thresholds for that, right? When you're doing government contracts, it's over a certain threshold. It's actually usually like $25,000. Anything over 25K, you can do a sole source contract under, I think it's 50 in some cases, but usually it's like not much more than that you can do a public, like a government sole source contract. So this is not a fair bidding process. That's a problem. Integrity. What's the integrity of this situation? This is the problem as well. Generally speaking, now I think some people are questioning his integrity based on the decisions that have been made in this circumstance, and there's some other ones as well. Integrity is living by values, right? Another way of looking at integrity is judgment. So when they do the polls, which they are doing, like I saw in the news last night with the Nanos. They'll do a poll based on whether people believe in someone's judgment. That's kind of, I would say integrity and judgment are closely related. So I think that will be an issue. It is an issue, and whether or not this is a decision made with the utmost of integrity, that would, I think, would be called into question here. Respect for others. How does that play a role here? Where there may have been shortcomings in respect for others in this process. Taxpayers feel cheated. Yeah. So taxpayers feel that there was a lack of respect for them. I think it's safe to say that. Some taxpayers and others may not, but for this amount of money that was being put out, regardless of what it was for, um, I believe from what it would be safe to say, and I think reasonable to say that people feel that there was not a respect for the taxpayer. People who made donations that may have gone to his family may not be happy either. Possibly there could be that. That could be an issue as well, possibly. I'm not sure about that, but the big one here with this specific incident, I think, respect for taxpayers is one. I think respect for competition, respect for other charities, right? I mean, there are other groups that could do this, for sure. There's no question out there. I think one of the issues that was raised was some charitable organizations felt that volunteers should not be getting paid for doing volunteer work. I think that was one of the issues on the news, which I don't know. The idea here is to get people having some income, so I don't necessarily personally agree with that. I think it's okay to get youth working and doing volunteer work. That sounds like a great idea to me, especially when they can't get a job doing anything else because the economy is in tatters. So, but respect for others, respect for your party, I think, is part of that. And then I think in his situation, he's probably feeling some challenges with respect for his family as well, because they've all been pulled into this. I feel for him in that regard for sure. And then lastly, responsible citizenship. What does it mean in this case to be a responsible citizen? There's that. That's a big one. Fiduciary responsibility. Anybody that's been in any kind of management position or corporate position or senior governmental position, you have a fiduciary responsibility. That's a big one. Especially when you're dealing with public funds. It's not like, part of fiduciary responsibility is using funds in a responsible way according to the values of the organization. So for instance, in this case, this is public funds. These are taxpayers' dollars being used for something. Therefore, there's a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that those funds are spent according to the principles and guidelines that are set out through procurement through the federal government, for one. I don't even know how they go and do this. I guess it's because of I don't know enough about they make spend decisions and get approvals, because it's crazy to me that they wouldn't have to go through a bidding process. I guess the pandemic allowed them not to do that. Anyway, but again, if you're in a corporate position, like a company, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders often, right? And that's another thing one needs to take in. But in this case, another dimension of responsible citizenship here is this is communal money, taxpayers' money used for Canadians. That's part of the situation. Therefore, is this what you could look at it that is this an appropriate use of funds in the right way? You can also look at it to say, look, I was trying to be a responsible citizen. Youth right now, the youth unemployment rate is probably, I don't know what it is, but I assume like in the 20s, maybe more. I would assume it is. It's probably even 30s. Who knows? So one could argue that being a responsible citizen was getting a program out the door as soon as possible so that students during the summer months have something to do, right? Can work and have gain some income. So that's an element of that value as well. So even in this situation, we can start to look at something that some people might think is cut and dry, which is you release the public and you're using taxpayers' money and say, well, we understand though, but we do see that certain elements of that decision were made based on ethical principles that we can stand, right? Dealing with youth and so forth. All right, so there we go. I mean, that's one way of doing it. This isn't the only way, but this is something I've used. I've got another great example. I'm not going to give it sort of an hour and a half, but maybe at another session I will talk about it. It's one time when I was, I was faced with an individual from the Congo at a conference, and when I was presenting one of our projects, and he felt that he was from the Pygmy Nation, and from the presentation I gave, or my component of it, he felt that his people were going to be basically screwed over, and then made everybody aware of that in the question period. I had to read that right there, me and my colleague. I won't do it right now, but again, what I used was, like in my head, was this. How do I react to this situation? By being caring, being honest, being accountable, keeping a promise of my client, pursuing excellence, being loyal, being fair, having integrity, having respect for others, respecting from where this person is coming from, and then also being a responsible citizenship, exercising responsible citizenship. But it was a tricky one, and we managed to get through it. But at least I had something to flow me through it. Good. So that's it. I'm going to put this through one more time, this reference, and then also the list. There you go. It's included in the document for the notes that you can download from the YouTube description of the video if you want. And that's it. That's all I have. So questions? Good. So just to conclude, now that we look at this image again, we see this messy, diverse, highly textured, disordered, complex image, which is exactly what these situations ethically are like in reality. We have a way, this is one way of bringing some order to that and helping you guide your thinking through it such that you can hopefully make a decision you're comfortable with. That's the idea at the end of the day. All right? Good. I'm going to thanks for coming out, and tutorials tomorrow for 660 and 560, and I will see the rest of you online.